Let me ask you something, sweetheart. Have you ever held a silence so deep, it became a shelter? Not an angry silence, not a punishing one, but a quiet so profound, it was the only space where you could finally hear the sound of your own soul whispering, "It is time to go." My leaving began not with a slammed door, but with the gentle click of a porcelain plate on a granite countertop. For over 3 decades, I defined myself within the walls of a marriage, within the expectations of a family that was never quite mine. I became an expert in the language of subtle neglect, in translating the quiet hurts into reasons to stay just a little longer. We talk so much about the fireworks of betrayal, the other woman, the discovered texts. But what about the slow, quiet frost that settles over a shared life? The kind that comes not from a single storm, but from a perpetual, chilling draft you're just expected to endure. This is not a story of a villain and a victim. It is the story of a woman who finally decided to stop building a fire for someone who preferred the cold, and instead, walked toward her own sun. It starts so small, you see. It starts with a gesture. A kindness offered. A plate extended. You must understand the setting of this first quiet betrayal. It was never a grand ballroom of hate. It was the cramped kitchen of ordinary life. The linoleum was worn near the sink from my standing. The morning light would cut across the table at 10 a.m. sharp. And the clock on the stove ticked a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat for the house. Into this ordinary stage she would make her entrance. Eleanor, his mother. She carried herself not like a villain from a storybook but like a librarian come to correct a filing error. Her smile was a thin line of benevolent duty. And in her hands always that china. That blue willow. The first time it happened I was too young to see the map she was drawing. Our first anniversary. James had worked late. I had made a meal. A small cake. I waited. The cake grew dry under its glass dome. When he came home his face was already sheepish, a boy caught forgetting his homework. Before I could speak the doorbell rang. And there she was. A parcel in her hands wrapped in paper from a department store that had closed years prior. "Darling," she said, gliding past me as if I were a piece of the hallway furniture. I was in the neighborhood and I just knew. "James, you scoundrel, you forgot the day, didn't you?" It was not a question. It was a proclamation. He slumped in relief. "Oh Mom, you saved me." She presented the parcel to me. It was a hand towel. Stiff with embroidery. It was not to my taste. It was to hers. And it was placed not in my hands but on a plate. A blue willow plate from her own collection. A loan for the presentation. "Think of it," she said, "as your first heirloom. Something to build your own traditions upon." The gesture was a masterpiece, you see. It appeared as a rescue. A mother's gentle steering of her foolish son toward the correct behavior. But the message etched in that fine bone china was clear as a bell to anyone who cared to listen. "I am the architect of this family. I provide the scripts. I supply the props. You dear are merely the understudy. Your anniversary is not a celebration of your union. It is an administrative date I will manage for my son." I thanked her. My voice was high and thin like a bird's. "Thank you, Eleanor. It's lovely." James beamed at his mother. "What would I do without you?" He never asked what I would do. The plate stayed on our table for a week. A week. That blue landscape with its weeping trees and its 2 forever frozen birds, a silent centerpiece to our meals. Every time I passed it I felt a small cold stone drop into the well of my stomach. I would wash it by hand, feeling the smooth, glaze the intricate ridges of the pattern. I dried it with care. I returned it to her the next Sunday like returning a crown jewel. She took it back with a nod. A queen accepting a tribute. The second year the pattern was set. His forgetfulness was now a tradition. Her rescue was now her duty. The gift was a set of coasters. Also blue. Also placed upon the loaned plate. From both of us. Those 3 words were the lock on the cage. From both of us. She erased my husband entirely and inserted herself into the partnership. She and I were now the couple giving the gift. She and he were the unit being celebrated for their bond. I was the spectator, the audience of one clapping politely at their performance. By the 5th year I began to see the machinery of it. It was a dance and every step was choreographed. The slight panic in his eyes as the date approached. His increased phone calls to her. The way he would look at the calendar as if it were written in a language he could not decipher. And then her arrival, always just in time. Never early enough for me to feel remembered. Never late enough for him to face the true consequence of his neglect. Her timing was surgical. The gift itself was irrelevant. A scented candle that gave me a headache. A cheap scarf the color of dust. Once a kitchen gadget for coring apples. I do not like baked apples. James loves them. The plate was the constant. That plate. It was her avatar, her stand-in. It was the physical manifestation of her worldview. That tradition and history and correct behavior were patterns established long ago by people like her. People with the right china. My role was to receive the pattern. To preserve it. To never deviate from the blue lines. I tried once. In the 7th year, I hinted weeks in advance. James darling, our anniversary is coming up. Just us this year maybe. A dinner. Just the two of us. He smiled and said, that sounds nice, hun. And then the day before the day she called. James must have spoken to her. She arrived not with a gift but with a suggestion. The oak room is lovely this time of year. I've already made a reservation for you. For 7. I'll watch the house. It was a restaurant she loved. A place with stiff tablecloths and food that tasted of obligation. The reservation was for 3. We sat there, the 3 of us. She ordered for James. He doesn't like pepper, dear. She reminded me. She conversed with him about people I did not know, relatives I had never met, stories from a childhood I did not share. I sat with my hands in my lap watching my own marriage become a dinner party for 2. The gift that year was a brooch. A heavy, ugly thing. It sat on the Blue Willow plate between our water glasses. A tiny monument. I wore it once to please her. It felt like a nail on my chest. The cruelty of it all was its impeccable manners. It was all done with a smile. With a concern for my feelings. We didn't want you to feel overlooked. The phrase was a ritual incantation. By saying they did not want me to feel overlooked, they guaranteed I would be. They named the wound as they were inflicting it. It was gaslighting with a lace doily under it. It was emotional theft performed with perfect posture. The year his mother died I felt a terrible, shameful hope. A hope that now the script might burn with her. That without his prompter my husband might finally have to look at me and see a wife and not a problem his mother solved. That anniversary was the quietest one of all. No doorbell, no plate, just the ticking of the kitchen clock. He forgot, of course. The forgetting was now ingrained. A habit of the heart. But this time there was no rescue. No plate to catch his failure. The silence that year was a living thing. It sat at the table with us. It was the ghost of Eleanor and the ghost of my hope both sitting in her chair. That was the year the plate in my mind finally cracked. Not from anger, from a profound and weary understanding. The gift was never the trinket. The gift was the plate itself. The plate was the message. And the message was that I would always be a guest in the house of his life. A guest who must be managed with careful, polite gestures so as not to disturb the real inhabitants, the mother and the son bound by history and china and a love that left no oxygen for anyone else. So when I finally on that last morning took her actual plate from her actual cabinet, I was not being clever. I was not staging a symbolic revenge. I was finally speaking back in the only language that had ever been used in this quiet war. The language of objects, of ritual, of presented things. I was saying, here is the cold geometry of your loyalty. Here is the landscape you preferred to the living, breathing woman in front of you. Here is your mother's love. It holds your coffee. It is beautiful and frozen and sad. Drink it. I left the plate there. On the table. I did not wash it. I did not return it. I let it be his to handle. His to clean. His to decide where it belonged in a house that was now truly only his. The gift that wasn't a gift had finally been returned to its rightful owner. And I walked away from the museum of their relationship a free woman. No longer a curator of artifacts that told a story I was never in. You become the furniture you see. Not all at once. Grain by grain. Day by day. You become the reliable surface. The steady lamplight. The floor that bears the weight without a sigh. It begins with love, of course. It always does. It begins with the fierce, joyful desire to build a nest. To make a home so warm, so safe, so perfectly tuned to his rhythms that he would never want to fly far. You learn his coffee. You learn the particular fold of his newspaper that pleases him. You learn that he likes his eggs turned at exactly the count of 30 and that the blue shirt is the one that makes him feel confident for the big meeting. You learn the silence he needs when he walks in the door tired. You learn the kind of touch on his shoulder that says I am here without asking for a thing in return. This is the architecture of love, the careful drafting of shared comfort. But somewhere along the way the blueprint changes. The architect disappears into the walls. You are no longer the designer of the home. You become its permanent fixture. Its essential utility, like water from the tap, like heat from the vent. Always there, always expected, remarkable only in its absence. I became so good at my job. The job of being his wife. I became a master of anticipatory care. I would see a wrinkle in his brow and have the aspirin and a glass of water in my hand before he could name the ache. I would hear a faint sigh over the bills and quietly take over the ledger the next day. I would notice a thinning in his favorite sweater and mend it in a single evening, the new thread weaving so perfectly with the old that the repair was invisible. My love was a silent efficient force, a gravity that held his world in a gentle predictable orbit. He would say thank you, hun. He would kiss my forehead. He would tell friends I don't know what I'd do without her. And I would glow with a sense of purpose. I had built something of value. A well-run life. A haven. But a strange thing happens when you become the haven. The traveler no longer sees you. He sees the comfort you provide. The peace. The order. He does not see the hands that arrange the flowers on the table. He only sees the bloom. He does not hear the effort behind the silence. He only enjoys the quiet. My desires, my small hungers began to feel like impositions. A want was a crack in the perfect foundation. To say I am tired was to risk the structure. To say I am lonely was to admit a failure in the design. So I folded my wants away. I placed them in a drawer like the good linen. For special occasions that never came. My laughter became quieter so as not to disturb his concentration. My sadness became a private thing, a fleeting shadow I would smooth from my face before he could see its shape. My entire inner life became a soundproof room I built inside myself. I lived in it. I decorated it with my own thoughts. And he never once knocked on the door because he did not know it was there. I made myself essential by making myself easy. I was never difficult, never demanding. My emotional needs were like the background hum of the refrigerator, a sound you notice only when it stops. And I never let it stop. I kept everything running. I was the administrator of our joy, the curator of our contentment. And in that role I became a ghost in my own home. A friendly, helpful ghost, but a ghost nonetheless. I remember the first time I truly felt it. The invisibility. It was a Saturday. I had been in the garden all morning. My hands were dark with soil. My back ached with the good honest pain of labor. I came into the kitchen where he was reading. I stood there for a full minute waiting for him to look up. To see me. To see the sweat on my temple, the smear of earth on my cheek. He turned a page. I poured a glass of water. The sound of the tap finally made him glance over. "Oh hey," he said. Then his eyes returned to the page. There was no malice in it. No intentional neglect. It was simply that I had become part of the environment. As expectable as the sunlight through the window. As unremarkable as the clock's tick. That was the day I began to understand the bargain I had made. I had traded visibility for stability. I had exchanged being seen for being useful. And usefulness is a cage with very, very comfortable bars. It is a cage where you are fed and sheltered and appreciated for your function. But you are not loved for your soul. You are valued for your service. And service has a ceiling. Service is not a partnership. It is a silent contract where one party gives and the other receives until giving becomes the only language you speak. My opinions became echoes of his. My schedule became an outline around his. My world became a satellite to his sun. I stopped bringing my own light because his was so bright and it was easier to bask in its warmth than to kindle my own flame. I told myself, this is love. This is sacrifice. This is what a good wife does. She builds a shrine to her husband's potential and tends the altar every single day. But a shrine is a cold place to live. The candles are not for warmth. They are for show. The flowers are not for joy. They are for decoration. And the keeper of the shrine is not a person. She is a function, a role, a set of tasks performed with reverence. I had so much reverence. And so little self. He would talk to me but he did not converse with me. He would share the events of his day like reading a news bulletin. He did not ask for my interpretation. He did not seek my counsel. He sought my audience, my attentive nod, my affirming hum. I was the sounding board for his life. A flat smooth surface that returned his own voice to him with a slight warmth. He never wondered what music lay in my own heart. What dreams I might have buried in the garden with the spent bulbs. What fears I held in the quiet hours before dawn. I became an expert in him. And he remained a pleasant stranger to me. I could tell you the curve of his spine in sleep. The way his breath hitched when he was dreaming. The particular scent of his skin after a long day. But if you asked him the color of my eyes when I am sad, he could not have told you. He would have said blue. They are green. The architecture of invisibility is built not with neglect but with 1,000 small accommodations. Each time you swallow a comment. Each time you laugh at a joke that isn't funny. Each time you place his preference over your own, you lay another brick. You mortar it with a smile. You tell yourself this is kindness. This is love. This is what it means to be a woman who holds things together. But holding things together is not the same as holding someone. And being held is what I long for. Not to be the foundation but to be the painting on the wall. Something to be seen, to be admired, to be cherished for its beauty and its uniqueness. Not for its ability to bear weight. The terrible beautiful truth finally broke over me like a slow dawn. I had made myself invisible. I had consented to my own erasure. One polite grateful smile at a time. He did not take my visibility from me. I handed it to him, wrapped in the pretty paper of duty and presented on the blue willow plate of a good woman's sacrifice. So when I finally stopped, when I finally ceased my silent efficient work of maintaining his world, the structure began to show its weaknesses. Not because I was destroying it, but because I had been the hidden support all along. The load-bearing wall disguised as wallpaper. And my quiet withdrawal was not an attack. It was simply a step back. A revealing of what had always been true. That the house was not a partnership. It was a stage. And I had been the stagehand moving in the shadows, making sure the spotlight was always on him. Walking away was not an act of vengeance. It was an act of reappearance. I was stepping out of the scenery and into my own skin. I was declaring myself not as a function but as a person. A woman with her own gravity, her own light, her own desires that were not impositions but birthrights. The architecture of invisibility crumbles the moment you choose to be seen. Even if the only person who sees you is yourself in the quiet mirror of a new morning. You look yourself in the eye and you say, I am here. I have always been here. And I will not disappear again. The forgetting was a living thing. It had a weight, a shape. It occupied space in our home as surely as the sofa or the stove. For 31 years it arrived with a kind of ritualistic precision, tied not to a date on a calendar but to a performance, a play in 3 acts with his mother as the director. The forgetting was not an absence. It was a presence, her presence, and then she was gone. That 32nd year, that was the year of the true silence. The unorchestrated silence. The year I decided to conduct my own small experiment in reality. I would not circle the date in red. I would not leave a subtle hint, a magazine open to a jewelry advertisement on the kitchen table. I would not bake a special dessert 2 days prior as a fragrant reminder. I would simply breathe and wait and see what was truly there when the scenery was removed. The days unspooled like ordinary thread. February was cold that year, a brittle gray month. The anniversary fell on a Tuesday. A Tuesday, the most ordinary of days. A day for washing sheets, for sorting. The recycling. On the Monday evening we sat in the den. He read a biography of a president. I mended a hem. The clock ticked. The furnace kicked on with a familiar groan. I watched his face in the lamplight. The lines around his eyes had deepened. He turned a page. He knew. Somewhere in the back of his mind, in the filing cabinet of obligations, he knew this date was his to remember. I could see the faintest tremor of something behind his eyes, a ghost of anxiety. A habitual ghost waiting for the telephone to ring, for the doorbell to chime, for his cue. No cue came. The phone was silent. The door stayed shut. The ghost flickered and faded. He turned another page. The moment passed. That night in bed, lying beside him in the dark, I felt a peculiar calm. A hollow calm, like the stillness in a church after everyone has left. This was it. This was the bare stage. No props. No supporting cast. Just him and just me and the unacknowledged truth of a day that meant something to one of us. I did not feel angry. Anger is a heat. This was a cold clear substance like ice water filling my veins. This was the evidence I had both dreaded and longed for. The proof. The morning of the anniversary dawned brittle and bright. I rose at my usual time. I made the coffee. The ritual was the same but I was different. I was an observer in my own kitchen. I watched my hands measure the grounds. I heard the pot begin its familiar gurgle. I saw him enter shrugging into his robe. His hair was sleep-tousled. He went to the window, peered out at the frost-streaked lawn. "Cold one," he murmured. I placed his blue mug on the table. He sat. He took his first sip. He did not look at me. He did not say my name. He did not have a sudden miraculous remembrance. There was no startle, no gasp, no "oh my God." There was just the sip. The sigh. The reaching for the newspaper. The silence in that room was a symphony. It had movements. The first movement was the hum of the refrigerator. The second was the scratch of his pen on the crossword. The third was the sound of my own heart beating steady and slow in my ears. I stood at the sink looking out at the frozen birdbath. And I understood. This was the gift. The final gift his mother could never have conceived of giving me. The gift of his unadorned, unmediated neglect. It was pure. It was undiluted by her interference. It was all his. The entire day stretched before me, a vast empty plain. I went about my tasks. I went to the market. I bought chicken and carrots and celery. I spoke to the cashier about the weather. I drove home. The house was empty. I put the groceries away. I stood in the center of the living room and I turned a slow circle. I was looking for a sign, any sign that this day was different from the one before it. A flower, a card, some evidence of a thought. There was only dust motes dancing in a shaft of pale sun. The weight of it was not a sharp pain. It was a profound atmospheric pressure. It was the weight of my own realization settling onto my shoulders. This was my life. This was the agreement. I had agreed to be forgotten. I had agreed by my silence, by my compliance, by my willingness for 3 decades to accept the plate from her hands. I had co-authored this story. And now the other author was gone and the protagonist had forgotten his lines and the play was collapsing into a silence so deep it echoed. He came home that evening. His keys landed in the brass bowl with their usual clatter. He called out, "Honey, I'm home," the same 2-note tune he always used. I was in the kitchen chopping the carrots for the soup. He came in, patted my shoulder, smelled the air. "Soup again," he said. "It's Tuesday," I said. My voice did not crack. It was flat, calm, a statement of fact. He nodded, opened the refrigerator, peered inside. He poured himself a glass of juice. He did not look at me. He did not see the woman standing there holding a knife with hands that did not tremble, holding the pieces of a day he had let shatter on the floor between us. We ate the soup at the table. The sound of our spoons against the bowls was loud in the quiet. He talked about a merger at work. He talked about the traffic on the bridge. He talked about the price of gasoline. I listened. I nodded. I watched his mouth form words that had nothing to do with the canyon opening up inside my chest. This was the authentic article. This was the unvarnished truth of his regard for me. I was the listener, the receptacle for the mundane details of his life. I was not the celebrant of his joys. I was not the healer of his wounds. I was the audience for his daily news report. And an anniversary was not news. It was feeling. And feeling was a language he had let atrophy, a muscle he had never chosen to flex for me. After dinner he fell asleep in his chair, the biography open on his chest, rising and falling with his breath. I turned off the lamp. I sat in the facing chair in the dark. I watched him sleep. In sleep his face softened. He looked younger. He looked like the man I had married, a man of potential, of hope. But the day had shown me the man he had chosen to become. A man who could let a day that meant everything to his wife slip through his fingers like sand without a single grain sticking to his skin. That night the forgetting became a tangible thing in the room. It was no longer an absence. It was a presence, a third entity. It sat in her chair. It had her smile. It held a blue willow plate. And it whispered, "This is what you are worth without me here to stage the reminder. This is your value in his heart. Measured and found to be unremarkable. Just another Tuesday." And that is when the shift occurred. The final tectonic slide of my soul. The pain did not morph into rage. It transformed into something far more powerful. Clarity. A cold, brilliant clarity like winter sunlight. This was the bedrock. This was the solid, unyielding ground of my reality. I had been building my house on the fault line of his negligence and his mother's management. Now the managers were gone. The fault had ruptured, and I was still standing. Alone, on solid ground, my own ground. The forgetting set me free because it was honest. For the first time in 32 years I was dealing with the truth. Not the truth obscured by her interference, not the truth cushioned by my own excuses. The naked, uncomplicated truth. He forgot, and in that forgetting he showed me everything. He showed me that I was not a priority, not a destination. I was a habit, a comfortable, well-worn path his feet traveled without his mind having to engage. I was the scenery on his commute. So I stopped waiting for the map to change. I stopped hoping he would one day look up from his own journey and see the landscape. I became the cartographer of my own territory. The forgotten anniversary was the North Star of my new navigation. It was the fixed point, the undeniable truth from which all other calculations could be made. If this day, this sacred day to me meant nothing to him, then what did? The answer was nothing. Nothing meant anything if this did not. That cold Tuesday was the gift I had been waiting for my entire married life. It was the permission slip. It was the liberation. It was the end of the dream and the beginning of my awakening. I was no longer a wife hoping to be seen. I was a woman who had been clearly shown her place in a man's world. And I found that place unacceptable. So I would build a new place. A place where the calendar was my own. Where the days were not measured by his remembrance but by my own presence in them. Where a Tuesday could be sacred simply because I breathed the air and found it good. He never mentioned it. Not the next day. Not the next week. Not ever. The forgetting was complete. It was a closed circle. And in that closure I found my opening. My way out. The door had been there all along. I had just been waiting for someone to open it for me. That Tuesday taught me I was the only one with hands. The drawer was where I kept the things meant for special occasions that never came. A silk camisole the color of moonlight still wrapped in its tissue paper. A bottle of French perfume from a trip we never took. The fine linen handkerchiefs from my grandmother. And at the very back beneath a fold of lavender-scented cloth was the sachet. It was small, no larger than my palm. My mother had embroidered it for me a long time ago. A simple sprig of ivy green threads on cream-colored cotton. It was meant for keepsakes. A lock of hair, a dried flower. I gave it a new purpose. I called it my Blue Willow Fund. Not out of spite but out of a private poetry. It was the place where I would save the seeds to grow a garden far from that blue and brittle landscape. It began not with a grand plan but with a single $20 bill. I had gone to the market for milk and bread. I stood at the checkout, the cashier ringing up my mundane items. When she handed me my change, 2 tens and some coins, a thought occurred to me. A thought so quiet it was almost not a thought at all. It was a reflex, a muscle memory of a self I had forgotten. This is not for groceries. This is for you. My fingers closed around the bills. They felt different, not like money, like a token, a key. At home I went upstairs, not to the kitchen to put things away but to my bedroom. I opened the lingerie drawer. The scent of lavender and cedar greeted me. I moved aside the silk, the lace. I found the sachet. I opened its tiny drawstring. I placed the 2 bills inside. They seemed absurd in there. Lonely. But they were mine. Wholly and secretly mine. That was the beginning. The first brick. The psychology of that sachet, that was everything. It was not hidden in a bank. It was not a number on a screen. It was physical, tactile. I could feel its slight weight when I lifted it. I could hear the soft crinkle of paper. It existed in the world of things. In the world of my stockings and my slips. It was a part of my most private self. My secret and my skin. That was important. It needed to be as intimate as a heartbeat. A heartbeat only I could hear. The rules were simple, unbendable. Every time I went to the market I would take out cash. $20. No more, no less. An amount that would not be missed. An amount that felt like a reasonable tax on the life I was sustaining. A life tax. I would pay it to myself. If I sold something, a book I no longer read, a vase that held no flowers, that money went into the sachet. Not into the household account. Not for a rainy day for us. For a sunny day for me. A day I could not yet imagine but whose light I could feel warming those folded bills. It was an act of faith. But not faith in a god or a miracle. Faith in my own two hands. Faith in the principle of accumulation. The slow stubborn magic of adding one small thing to another. I was building a raft. One plank at a time. In the basement of a ship I did not own. No one saw me carving the wood. No one heard the tap of my hammer. They only saw me going about my daily business, the reliable wife, the efficient homemaker. They did not see the architect inside me drafting a new blueprint. A blueprint for an escape pod disguised as a life. There were times, of course, when it felt foolish. When the sachet seemed like a child's game. I would take it out, count the money. A few $100s. What was that in the face of a lifetime? What was that against the weight of a house, a history, a marriage? It felt like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. My own Blue Willow teacup. The irony was not lost on me. But then I would remember. The ocean is made of drops. The journey is made of steps. This was not about the sum. It was about the act. The ritual. Every time I folded a bill and tucked it away, I was making a promise to a future version of myself. I am coming for you. I am building a bridge. Stay where you are. I will find you. It became my spiritual practice. My quiet rebellion. Balancing the checkbook for the house, I would feel a thrill knowing my secret column, my hidden ledger. Watching James worry over stocks and retirement funds, I felt a serene detachment. My fund was not subject to the markets. It was not a number on a statement. It was hope made literal. Cash in a bag. It could not crash. It could only grow. I took the bookkeeping job for Clara, not just for the money, though that was the reason I gave. I took it for the cover. For the alibi. 2 afternoons a week I would go to her flower shop, sit in her back office surrounded by the smell of damp earth and cut stems. I would enter numbers into her computer. The soft click of the keys was the sound of my own freedom being tallied. The check she gave me, it was made out to me. In my name. For my work. I would cash it. I would put the money into my account and then I would take out the cash. And the cash would go into the sachet. The circle was complete. My labor transformed into my future. It was alchemy. The sale of my mother's pearls, that was the hardest deposit. They were the one thing of true value that was unequivocally mine. A legacy from a woman who had known her own mind. I held them in my hands, the cool smooth spheres like petrified tears. They represented something, a certain kind of womanhood. A dignified, adorned presence. But they were in a box. In the dark. They were not adorning anyone. They were a memory. I took them to a jeweler in the city, a kind older man with gentle eyes. He appraised them under a light. He gave me a figure. It was a real sum. A life-changing sum for the woman with the sachet. I did not hesitate. I said yes. The transaction was clinical. He handed me a banker's check. I felt a pang as I walked out of the shop, my neck feeling strangely light. But by the time I reached the car, the feeling had changed. The weight was gone, but so was the anchor. The pearls were no longer around my neck. They were wings in my pocket. I did not put all of that money into the sachet, of course. That would have been foolish. I opened a separate account. A quiet account at a different bank. But I allowed myself to take $1,000 in cash. $1,000 in crisp $100 bills. I brought it home. I went to my room. I laid the bills on the bed. 10 of them. I smoothed each one. I folded them. They made a satisfying stack. I opened the sachet. It could not hold them all. The sight of it, this humble embroidered pouch overflowing with this kind of serious money, it made me laugh. A soft soundless laugh that shook my shoulders. It was the absurd beautiful image of my own power. My secret was now too big for its container. A metaphor I cherished. That was the moment I knew it was real. The fund was no longer a dream. It was a tool, a means. The raft had enough planks to float. I began to research in earnest. Not dreaming but planning. I looked at maps. I calculated distances. I searched for rentals, not in a wistful way but with the sharp eye of a general surveying terrain. I found the cottage on the lake on a website. The photo showed morning light on water. The kitchen window was a square of gold. I knew it. I knew it the way you know your own name. I called the number. I spoke to the landlord. My voice did not waver. I gave him the details of my new bank account for the deposit. I used Clara's shop as a reference for my character. I said I was a bookkeeper. I was. I secured it. Just like that. The most decisive act of my adult life conducted in a whisper from the back room of a flower shop. The packing was the final phase. I did not buy suitcases. That would have raised questions. I used the bags we already had. The large rolling suitcase from the trip we took to her funeral. The weekender bag. Slowly over the course of weeks I would bring a bag to my car under the guise of taking things to the dry cleaner or donating to the thrift store. I would instead fill it with my life. My books. My photographs. The small ceramic vase I had made in a class years before. My winter coat. My good boots. I placed them in the trunk of my car and covered them with an old blanket. A car trunk became the antechamber of my new existence. Every time I opened it to put in groceries I would see the shape of my future under that tartan wool. It was a comfort, a promise. The morning I left the sachet was empty. Its work was done. I held it for a moment before placing it in my purse. It was light now, just cloth and embroidery, but it had held a universe. It had held the discipline of 1,000 small decisions. The courage of 100 silent acts of self-preservation. It was not money that bought my freedom. It was the ritual, the daily choosing of myself in a single tangible way. The sachet taught me that freedom is not a sudden event. It is a savings plan. You make deposits in patience. In silence. In strategy. You watch the interest compound in your own resolve. When I finally drove away I did not feel like a fugitive. I felt like a treasurer delivering a long-held investment to its rightful owner. Me. The money had been just a symbol. A stand-in for my own worth. I had been paying myself back for years of unpaid emotional labor. With every folded bill I was saying I am worth this. My peace is worth this. My future is worth this. The Blue Willow Fund was never about buying a new life. It was about proving to myself that I was worth the purchase price. And by the time I had enough to leave I had known it for years. The leaving was just the final transaction. The cashing in. The morning was a bell. A clear cold bell without a sound. I stood in the kitchen in the pre-dawn dark and I understood I was performing a sacrament. A final rite. The coffee maker gurgled its ancient song. The smell of dark roast filled the room, a smell woven into 32 years of mornings. My hands moved without instruction. They were the hands of a priestess preparing an offering not to a god but to a truth. This was not about coffee. This was about closure. A circle demanded to be closed. I opened the cabinet. The good cabinet. The one with the glass doors that held her china. The Blue Willow. I had not opened it since her death. A fine layer of dust made the glass opaque. My fingers left trails in the dust-like paths on a map. The latch gave with a soft click. The smell that wafted out was not of a kitchen. It was of a parlor. Of stored formalities. Of lavender polish and stillness. The plates were stacked in towers. Saucers. Soup bowls. The famous plates. Each one a perfect frozen world of blue bridges and impossible birds. I did not choose the best plate. I did not choose the worst. I reached for the one in the middle. The most average plate. The one that had likely never been used. Its destiny was not a roast or a slice of pie. Its destiny was this. I lifted it out. It was cool. Heavier than I remembered. The dust was on my fingers. I did not wipe it. I carried it to the sink. I turned on the water. I washed it. The water beaded on the glossy surface. The pattern seemed to deepen under the wetness to become more vivid. The little boat on the river. The two figures on the bridge forever walking toward one another, never arriving. I dried it with a clean towel. I made it spotless. I made it perfect. I placed it on the granite counter. The sound it made was not a clatter. It was a pronouncement. A period at the end of a very long sentence. I stood looking at it. This object that had been a ghost in my marriage, a symbol of a power dynamic I had accepted for a lifetime. It was just a plate. Clay and glaze and cobalt dye. And yet it was the altar upon which my identity had been sacrificed year after year. I made his coffee. Dark. 2 sugars. No cream. I stirred it. The spoon did not clink against the sides. I was moving through water. Every action was slow, deliberate, and fused with a final meaning. I picked up his mug. The navy blue one his mother had bought. The one that had been his father's. The vessel of his daily comfort. I held it over the plate. I paused. This was the moment of transference. The moment where the ritual of my care would be poured into the symbol of his allegiance. I poured. The coffee streamed dark and hot into the mug. It filled it to just below the rim. The steam rose in a fragrant plume. I set the carafe down. I looked at the arrangement. The blue mug sitting in the exact center of the blue plate. The two blues did not match. His mug was a solid flat navy. The plate was an intricate pattern of cobalt and white. They clashed. They spoke of different worlds. That was the truth of it. He had been trying to live in both worlds. The world of his mother's expectations and the world of our marriage. And I had been the bridge between them. The bridge that bore the weight. Now I was removing the bridge. I carried the plate to the table. To his spot. The morning light was just beginning to touch the window. It fell across the table in a pale bar. I set the plate down so the light illuminated the pattern. The scene glowed. It was beautiful in its way. A beautiful prison. I placed his napkin to the left. His spoon to the right. A perfect place setting. A perfect trap. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. The familiar creak on the third step. The shuffle of his slippers. He entered the kitchen tying the belt of his robe. His hair was ruffled from sleep. His eyes went to the coffee maker out of habit. Then they traveled to the table. They saw the plate. He stopped. His hands froze on the silk belt. A faint confused smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a man confronted with a puzzle in a familiar room. "Mom's plate," he said. His voice was morning rough. "What's the occasion?" He did not look at me. He looked at the plate. He was trying to decipher it. His mind was scrolling through a mental calendar. His birthday. No, his mother's birthday. She was gone. A holiday. It was Tuesday. Nothing. I stood by the sink. My hands were dry. I wiped them on my apron, a gesture so mundane it anchored me to the earth. I looked at him. I really looked at him. The man I had slept beside for 11,000 nights. The man whose breathing was more familiar to me than my own. I saw the boy in him then. The boy who had always looked to his mother for the answer. The boy who was now 58 years old and still looking for her in an empty chair. "It's our anniversary, James." The words left my mouth flat and clean. No accusation, no tremor. A simple statement of fact. Like saying the sky is blue. Or the coffee is ready. His face underwent a transformation. The confusion melted into a blank white shock. Then the shock flushed into a panicked red that climbed from his neck to his hairline. His mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted from the plate to my face, then back to the plate as if the plate could contradict me. "Oh my God, May, it completely slipped my mind." His voice was a rush, a jumble. He took a step toward the table as if to touch the plate to verify its reality. His hand hovered over it. He didn't touch it. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with a genuine horrified realization. Let me make it up to you. Dinner tonight, anywhere you want." His voice was bright with desperate energy. He was building a life raft out of restaurant reservations. He was offering a treat to a child who had been overlooked. The old pattern: forget, panic, compensate, all in the span of 10 seconds. I just smiled. A small closed-lipped smile. The smile I had practiced in the mirror. The smile that said, "I am not angry. I am beyond you." I saw my smile hit his eyes. It confused him more than anger would have. Anger was a language he understood. A storm to wait out. This calm, this was a foreign country. "There's no need. The coffee's getting cold." My voice was so soft it was almost part of the morning silence. I turned. I did not turn dramatically. I turned as if I had remembered something in the other room. I walked toward the hallway. My steps were even. I heard the floorboard sigh under my weight. I was moving through a substance thicker than air. "May," his voice behind me, thin, stretched. "Where are you going?" I did not answer. I kept walking. I reached the front hall closet. I opened it. I took out my coat. It was a tan trench coat. Practical. I slipped it on. The lining was cool. I buttoned it slowly from the bottom to the top. Each button a deliberate act. I picked up my purse from the hall table. It was not a large purse. It held my wallet, my phone, my lipstick. And a single key on a plain ring. It felt heavy. The key was heavy. I opened the front door. The cool morning air rushed in. It smelled of damp grass and possibility. It was the smell of the world outside this house. A world I had been visiting in my mind for years. I stepped 1 foot over the threshold. I paused. I turned back. He was still standing by the table. He had not moved. He was a statue of a man caught between a blue plate and a disappearing wife. His face was a portrait of utter incomprehension. He did not understand what was happening. He could not compute the data. The plate. The forgotten date. My calm. My coat. The open door. It was a system error. I looked him in the eye. From this distance his face was softer. The details blurred. He was just a man in a robe standing in a pool of morning light. I'm going to learn what it feels like, I said. My voice was clear now. It carried. It filled the space between us. To be remembered. I let the words hang. I did not explain them. I did not qualify them. They were not for him to understand in that moment. They were for me to say. They were the final line of my script. Then I turned. I stepped fully out onto the porch. I pulled the door closed behind me. I did not slam it. I pulled it until I felt the latch engage. A soft solid click. The sound was absolute. It was the period. The end. The seal on a vessel. It was the most powerful sound I had ever heard. More powerful than any vow I had taken at an altar. This was the unvow. The sound of a promise being gently released back into the universe. I stood on the porch for a heartbeat. I could see my car in the driveway. The trunk held my life. The morning was quiet. A dog barked somewhere far away. I breathed in the cold air. It felt clean in my lungs. Inside that house was a man staring at a cold cup of coffee on his mother's plate. He was surrounded by the architecture of a life built on forgetting. The furniture we had chosen. The pictures on the walls. The clock ticking on the mantel. All of it was now a museum. And he was the sole curator of a collection he never truly saw. I had served him the truth. On the very platter of his own making. I had served it calmly without drama. I had given him back his choices. His loyalty. His priorities. All represented in that simple terrifying arrangement of china and caffeine. And then I had walked away. Not in a storm of tears. Not in a blaze of righteous fury. In a silence so profound it was its own language. A language he had never learned to speak. A language of dignity, of self-possession, of a love for oneself so deep it finally surpasses the need to be loved by another. The ritual was complete. The last coffee, the mother's plate, the closed door. I walked to my car. I did not look back at the house. I opened the car door. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cold. I put the key in the ignition. I did not start it yet. I sat in the silence of my own choosing. The silence after the click. It was the most beautiful silence I had ever known. It was full of nothing but my own breath. My own future, unspooling now like a road under a new sun. The door was oak, solid. It had swelled in the summer humidity for years and I would have to put my shoulder into it to make it close right. That morning it was perfect. The wood was cool and smooth under my palm. The brass knob was polished from 1,000 exits and entrances. My hand did not shake. My breath was even. I pulled it toward me. The weight of it was familiar. A weight I had carried metaphorically for decades. The weight of keeping things in. Of keeping his world intact. Of keeping the peace that was not peace but a quiet war of attrition. As I pulled I felt the resistance of the air inside pushing out. The warm still air of the house with its smells of coffee and wool and yesterday. It rushed past me eager to escape. And then the door met the frame. The brass tongue of the lock found its home in the strike plate. It was not a loud sound. In the grand symphony of a life it was the softest note. A click. Dry. Precise. Final. That click was not an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a silence so profound it had a texture. It was the sound of a boundary I had drawn not in anger but in absolute clarity. A line around the territory of my soul that declared you may not pass. For 32 years the borders had been open. His needs, his moods, his forgetfulness, his mother, they had all been free to come and go as they pleased, trampling the tender gardens of my spirit, leaving footprints in the soil of my heart. I had been a territory without a fence. A country without a name on the map. The click was the sound of the gate shutting. Not with a bang to announce a siege, but with a quiet decisive mechanism engaging. A lock turning in a chamber. It was a sound of governance. Of self-possession. It was the administrative sound of a woman taking back the deed to her own life. I did not linger on the porch. I did not press my ear to the wood to hear his reaction. His reaction was no longer my concern. His confusion, his panic, his eventual dawning regret, those were storms that would now rage inside the house he had made. They were not my weather. I had walked out of his climate. The air on the porch was different. It was neutral. It belonged to no one. It was just air, and it was mine to breathe. I walked to my car. The gravel of the driveway was the same gravel. The birch tree we planted the first year was the same tree. But they were different now. They were not ours. They were objects in the world. I was an object in the world. Separate, whole. I was no longer part of a compound entity called James and May. I was May, a woman in a trench coat with a purse and a key walking on gravel on a Tuesday morning. The sound of my heels on the stones was loud in the new silence. Crunch, 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 a marching beat, the beat of one, not two, one heart, one set of footsteps, one destination, my own. I opened the car door. The sound of the handle, the sigh of the hinges. These were the sounds of my escape vehicle. But it did not feel like an escape. It felt like a departure. A planned journey, like catching a train you have been watching for on the schedule for years. I slid into the driver's seat. The seat was adjusted for me. For my legs, my reach. I had done that last week. A small preparation, a claiming. I placed my purse on the passenger seat. It did not contain much. But what it contained was everything. Identification in my name, money I had earned, a key to a door that would open only for me. The emptiness of that purse was its power. It was not cluttered with the debris of a shared life. Receipts for things he bought. Golf tees, a peppermint from a restaurant. It was clean. It was mine. I put the key in the ignition. I did not turn it. I sat. I looked through the windshield at the house. Our house. His house now. It looked back at me with its blank windows. It was just a structure. Wood and brick and shingles. It had no memory. It had held our joys and our sorrows, but it did not care. Houses are not keepers of secrets. They are containers. And I had just emptied myself from this one. I looked at the front door. The door I had just closed. From this side it was just a door. A rectangle of painted wood. The click had rendered it ordinary. It was no longer a portal to my life. It was an exit I had used. Nothing more. Inside that door was a man who was at this very moment experiencing a form of physics he did not understand. The physics of emotional gravity. For his entire life I had been the mass that held him in orbit. A steady, reliable pull. He may not have cherished the pull, but he had counted on it. It was the force that kept him from spinning into the void of his own emptiness. He had used my gravity to feel grounded while offering none of his own in return. He had floated in the space of our marriage tethered by my weight. The click was the sound of that tether being cut. Not severed violently, unclipped, with calm intention. And now he would experience weightlessness. The cold sickening float of realizing the center he took for granted was gone. That he was adrift. That the coffee would not make itself tomorrow. That the silence would not be a comfortable one but an echoing chamber. That the plate on the table would sit there until he himself, James, would have to pick it up, wash it, dry it, and decide where it belongs. He would have to become the curator of his own loneliness. The architect of his own quiet. I did not do this to punish him. Punishment requires anger and a desire for him to feel pain equivalent to mine. I was beyond that equation. I had moved into a new mathematics where he was not a variable. His pain or lack of pain was irrelevant. This was not about him. This was about the integrity of the line. The boundary. I had drawn it around myself to preserve what was left of the woman I was before I became a satellite to his sun. The click was the sound of that preservation. A vault door ceiling. I thought of him finding the note. I had left it on the kitchen table beside the pepper mill. It was not a long letter. It was not an explanation. It was a fact. James, I have left. I will be in touch through my lawyer. Do not call. May. I had signed my name. Just my name. Not love, May. Not with regret, May. Just May. A statement of authorship. I had authored this decision. I owned it. He would read it. He would read it standing in that kitchen with the cold coffee and the blue plate. The words would not compute at first. Through my lawyer. That would be the phrase that jolted him. It was a phrase from another world. A world of partitions and proceedings. A world as far from the soft fog of his neglect as a courtroom is from a bedroom. It made it real, legal, adult. It meant I was not playing a game. I was not having a mood. I had moved into the realm of action. I had brought in professionals. The click of the door was the period at the end of that note. The final piece of punctuation. It made the note irreversible. You cannot call out to a woman who has closed a door. You cannot argue with a click. It is a sound that offers no rebuttal. It is the end of discussion. I finally turned the key. The engine came to life. A low steady rumble. A sound of potential energy. Of movement. I put the car in reverse. I looked once more in the rearview mirror. Not at the house. At the driveway. At the space I was about to vacate. I backed out slowly. I did not spin the wheels. I did not hurry. There was no pursuit. I was not being chased. I was leaving. There is a dignity in a slow exit. It says you are sure. You are not fleeing. You are transitioning. I put the car in drive. I looked ahead down the street. The road was empty. It was waiting. I touched the gas pedal. The car rolled forward. The house began to slide out of the frame of my rearview mirror. It grew smaller. Just a house among houses. Then it was gone. Around a corner. Out of sight. The click was now inside me. It was not just a sound that had happened. It was a sound I had become. A settled decisive sound in my spirit. The sound of my own sovereignty snapping into place. For years my soul had been a door ajar. Swinging in the winds of his opinion, his mother's criticism, my own need to please. Letting in every draft, every chill. Now it was closed, latched. The internal climate was my own to regulate. Every mile that stretched between me and that house was a mile into the territory of that click. Into the land of my own authority. The landscape did not change. The same stores, the same gas stations, the same sky, but it was all new because I was seeing it through the eyes of a woman who had closed a door. A woman who had chosen the sound of a lock over the noise of a lifetime of compromise. A woman who finally understood that the most powerful thing she could do was to remove her presence from a place it was not valued. Not with drama, not with a scene, but with a clean, quiet, definitive click. That sound was my legacy. Not the marriage, not the years of service. The click. It was the sound of my freedom being born. A small, dry, uncelebrated sound that echoed into the future I was now driving toward. It was the sound that marked the moment I stopped being a guest in someone else's story and became the author of my own. And no one can ever unhear it. No one can ever undo it. It is a fact in the history of the world, that on a Tuesday morning in October a door closed, and a woman drove away, and she never once looked back. So you see, it was never about the coffee, or the plate, or even the forgetting. It was about the sound a soul makes when it finally fits itself back into its own shape. A soft, dry click of alignment. They will ask you, society, well-meaning friends, the little voice in your own head that still fears the quiet, they will ask you what you gained. They will want a tally. A new man. A bigger house. A dramatic triumph posted for the world to see. Do not bother with that arithmetic. What I gained cannot be measured in square footage or likes or even in the sweet, solitary piece of my cottage by the lake, though that piece is a bomb I drink in every morning. What I gained was far more simple, and far more profound. I gained the unshakable knowledge that I could. That I, May, who had become a whisper in my own life, could become the author of its next chapter. I learned that planning is a form of prayer. That silence is not emptiness, but a vessel waiting to be filled with your own, true voice. That walking away is not an ending, but the first, most sacred step toward yourself. The woman who drove away that morning was not the same woman who made that first deposit in the embroidered sachet. That woman was full of fragile hope. The woman driving the car was full of silent certainty. The transformation happened in the doing. In the folding of the bills. In the clicking of the keyboard as I researched my future. In the deliberate placement of that plate on the table. To anyone listening who is in the season of the quiet frost, I am not here to tell you to leave. I am here to tell you to listen. Listen to the silence between his words. Look at the patterns on the plates you are handed. Feel the weight of your own forgotten anniversaries. And then, if that is what your soul whispers, I am here to tell you that you can begin. Today, not with a declaration, but with a decision. A decision to open a drawer. To save a single $20 bill, or its equivalent in hope, for the woman you were meant to become. A decision to stop reminding him, and start remembering yourself. Build your bridge in secret. Plank by steady plank. Have your quiet plan. Your dignity is your greatest capital. Guard it. Invest it in yourself. And when the day comes, and you will know it, you will feel it in the very marrow of your bones, have the courage to serve the last coffee on the plate they chose for you. Have the courage to speak your truth in a calm, clear voice. Have the courage to turn, to walk, to close the door without a slam. And then, my dear, dear sisters, drive. Drive toward your own becoming. The road may be unfamiliar. The landscape may seem strange at first. But you are finally, blessedly, heading home. To yourself. The click of that door is not an end. It is the sound of your own freedom, opening. Thank you for listening. Now, go in peace, and in your own, powerful, quiet power.